It's no surprise to hear that manga and anime have taken the world by surprise in the last years and segmented its place as a mainstream form of media. It is also no surprise to know that there's a specific genre for all taste that go from romantic, everyday life, shonen, seinen, and why not, disturbing at some point. You may be familiarized with Junji Ito's collection of horror stories, Evangelion, Berserk, Hellsing, Serial Experiments Lain, or even other works like Genocyber and Devilman if you're a connoisseur. But what about those that are either a bit darker in tone, psychologically scaring, or disturbing to the point you would not even think about recommending it to a friend? You know, just like this one. Does it ring a bell? Well, I've got some right here that will make you question your life in many ways. Let's talk about them. Roll the intro. A World of Smiles, Egao no Sekai. Created by Misaki Kairi, Egao no Sekai feels to me like a manga version of Black Mirror, where every single chapter tells a different story with surprising and devastating twists. In order to not ruin you with spoilers, I would like to give you a heads up of the first chapter, which really resonated with me for personal reasons. The story follows the story of Rikako Ueda, a 5th grader that lives in a very dysfunctional house and just wants to live a happy and careless life. However, she still has to deal with major issues in her life, such as her negligent mother and her school. If you've ever been to school, you would know that it's inevitable to see bullying happening to students. After all, it's been a topic of discussion for years at this point, and for some reason, authorities still pretend to look the other way, pretending it never happened. This is a personal subject for me as a victim of bullying, so you can imagine why it feels disturbing to me. In World of Smiles, not only is bullying forgiven, but also encouraged. The reason for this reasoning is because by bullying those in the weakest positions, the ones in the stronger position can get rid of frustration and anger issues and live happily without worries. Sounds bad, right? Well, it gets worse. In the first chapter of the manga, it is mentioned right away that those who suffer from bullying can issue a suffering certificate where electrodes are placed in the human brain that nullify the pain and discomfort so that others can still continue to bully that kid. We are talking about a dystopian reality where the only way for a prosperous society to exist is for people to commit horrible acts of violence, mental distress, and other unimaginable acts against the weak, and these last ones never having the ability to complain or do something about it. But this won't apply to just the kids. Adults are included too. From teachers, regular everyday workers, parents, anyone who is at the lowest will become a punching bag for those that urge the feeling of torturing or inflicting pain on others. How does this chapter end? I'd rather not tell you, as the ending of this story will leave you with your mouth wide open after experiencing a void in your chest. The rest of the chapters that follow are equally disturbing, as it shows horrid realities for the main characters, who are mostly children experiencing horrible events that defy what a status quo should be. Out of the most disturbing concepts that I'm going to talk about, this is the latest one so far, so be ready for what comes next. The Horizon. Okay, I'm aware that I may be cheating a bit here, since this is not a manga, but a manhwa, meaning that it is not Japanese, but Korean instead. But The Horizon is a truly disturbing story because it shows a realistic post-apocalyptic world from the perspective of two children, a boy and a girl, that found each other after a virus overtakes the world and their parents perish during the incident. Created by Ji-hoon Young, this comic illustrates different realities that could happen if a scenario like this existed in real life, from cannibalism, civil war, tough choices, resilience, and other horrible moments that the protagonists have no options but to face. The most thrilling moment of this story, in my opinion, is when they encounter the old man who doesn't say any coherent word and simply follows the two children. His presence is eerie, doubtful, and questionable. The boy is always aware of his presence and doesn't trust him, putting a huge weight on his mind when it comes to choosing to kill or to let the worst happen to him and the girl. This only happens in the first arc of the story, so you can only imagine what could happen next. Not Simple. One of the shortest stories of this list, Not Simple, was written by Natsume Ono. The story is told through the findings of a journalist called Jim, who wrote a book called Not Simple about a guy named Ian, who might be a real person or not. The plot focuses on Ian's story from when he was a little kid to the day he is brutally stabbed in a restaurant. And no, this is not a spoiler, since this is just the first chapter of this manga. As you can see, this specific manga does not follow a traditional chronological order per se, but rather a set of events that happen at different moments that are scattered throughout the story, allowing the reader to find the links and understand how everything is directly connected to Ian. Sadly, Ian's story is tragic and terrifying. From neglectful parents, a sister in prison, tales of physical and mental abuse, abandonment, and very taboo issues that show the horrible traits of human nature, in which Ian falls little by little just for being born in this world in the wrong place and the wrong time. The only person Ian fully trusts is his sister, Kylie, who is unfortunately, as I mentioned previously, in jail for reasons I'd rather not say, so it won't spoil the story for you. The interesting part of this is that rather than being a psychological horror, I would call it realistic horror. You see, these may not have hypothetical scenarios of a world ending, a dystopian future with questionable morality, or monsters that would maul your face. This is something that could be happening to anyone in this very moment. Moments of loneliness, desperation, ostracism, and abuse that no matter ethnicity, religion, origin, or gender, abuse can happen to anyone. This story does not show anything graphic specifically, but does provide an insight through subtext the amount of pain and despair Ian is going through as he grows up. Definitely not a story for anyone susceptible to delicate content. Oyasumin Punpun. I am aware that this manga has become really popular in the latest years, and if you have read it already, then you know this will either lift your spirit or tear you to pieces. Created by the mastermind of Inio Asano, Goodnight Punpun follows the story of Punpun, a little bird-like creature that lives in a very realistic Japanese society and experiences traumatic moments through his life that shape the kind of person he ends up becoming. Remember when I said that Not Simple was disturbing because it could happen to anyone? Well, Punpun does the same thing but cranks it up to 11. Despite being full of abstract messages and imagery, Punpun does not fail to deliver a perfect representation of a very young kid whose psyche goes downhill even lower every single day. Not only that, But this manga shows how every single person can develop terrible human traits as they grow up without even noticing it. And Pompon is no exception. The interesting thing of this work is that anyone can relate to Pompon or any of these characters, even if we don't like what they are doing because it shows the reality of human nature. How do you go from a little kid dreaming about discovering a new planet to a true nihilistic and depressed young adult obsessed with the way your life is going? Pompon shows how we all felt at some point and is not afraid to explore the worst outcome as well. From turning into something unrecognizable that strays away from your former self to being held accountable for your actions and even seeing how not only Pompon but the rest of the characters are broken people. None of the actions that happen in Pompon are justifiable or acceptable, but that's not the point of the story. The point is that even though these are not good, they still happen, and we can see a clear insight of every character's mind as they process their experiences, from anger, regret, self-realization, traumas, you name it. For a manga whose main protagonist is a scribble of a little bird, I can say for sure that Pompon feels really human and real. Way too real, in my opinion, if you ask me. Belladonna of Sadness. Directed by Eiji Yamamoto, Belladonna of Sadness is the oldest of this list, as it is a Japanese adult animated film from 1973 with a unique art style that has not been replicated ever since. With a psychedelic aesthetic and lack of fear to show nudity or explicit scenes, Belladonna of Sadness is not afraid to push boundaries when it comes to telling a story. The plot follows two characters, Jean and John, a couple living in rural France during medieval times. On Jean's wedding night, she is brutally gang-raped in a deflowering ritual by the local baron and his courtiers. She returns to John terrified, and he attempts to calm her by saying that they can start over from that moment. Shortly after they embrace, however, Jean strangles Jean to a state of unconsciousness. Ashamed, he flees outside their home. The plot is dark and horrifying already, but it only starts from here. After suffering these despicable actions, she starts seeing a creature-like spirit with a phallic-shaped head that promises her powers that can grow as much as she wants. With this, Jean becomes a powerful human who is both recognized and beloved by the townspeople, enraging the Baron in the process, who can't accept the fact that someone is more powerful or wealthy than him. Because of this, the spirit promises to raise her powers even more if she offers her body in return, meaning that she needs to get raped in the process. I don't want to go into more detail of this story as it's quite interesting and, for me at least, resembles a Shakespearean play for the symbolism and act development. The reason why this is disturbing, other than the plot, is because even though it is full of medieval fantasy, it's the imagery used in this movie that catches me off guard. From the surrealism, abstract imagery, and flashing constant lights in an animation that looks like it was made in a watercolor painting, joined by the experimental sound design, provide a different kind of experience that's not suited by everyone necessarily. Midori, the Camellia Girl, Chika Gento Gekiga. If Salo, or the 120 Days of Sodom, is the Western epitome of graphically unsettling, then Chika Gento Gekiga by Suehiro Maruo is the same concept in the East. To put it into perspective, this movie has been incited by the Japanese authorities to destroy original copies of it because of how hostile and crude it is. The story shows a young 12-year-old girl called Midori who is forced to quit school and sell camellias to sustain her family after being abandoned by her father under the care of her mother. After a day of not selling a single camellia, she runs into a mysterious man who listens to her story and offers to buy all her flowers so she can make it to the end of the month, while also telling her that she can count on him if things get too difficult, giving her an address to go to when she needs it. After arriving at her home that same day to tell her mother the good news, she finds her mother dead, being eaten by rats, forcing the little girl to go to this mysterious address looking for a place to stay, which ends up being a freak show in a circus. And this is where things get truly disturbing. The moment she arrives to this circus, Midori experiences horrible events such as rape, animal cruelty, physical and mental abuse, and many other things, just to mention a few. That could easily summarize the entire story of this plot, but it does get more horrifying as the plot advances. We go from uncensored child physical exploitation, mutilation, abstract horror, and body dismemberment as other taboo topics as well. Just like Salo, as I mentioned previously, you will find yourself wondering why you even began watching this in the first place, as it does not have a kind or positive message. It tells a tragic story that may make you not want to see how it ends. Shin Gendai Ryokiden. This one is the most heartbreaking. Shin Gendai Ryokiden is a manga created by Waita Uziga that follows the story of Junko Furuta, a high school girl that gets kidnapped by a group of men that take her to an apartment where they proceed to do unimaginable things. I truly don't want to say what they do exactly to her, as the content of this manga is too explicit and revolves your stomach as you read it. But if I have to provide any data for the sake of informing people, I can say that it involves physical violence, rape, genital torture, and sodomy to a level that only a psychopath would do, all without showing any sort of censorship or subtext, all explicit in front of you. I will proceed to tell you the ending of this manga and you'll understand why. The girl ends up dying and they hide her corpse inside a cement block, which is later found by the police, leading them to arrest the criminals. The content of this manga is pretty gruesome and disturbing as it is, but you know what the worst part is? Remember when I said that Not Simple and Pum Pum show an outstanding level of realism in the stories? Well, it doesn't get any higher than this because this story actually happened. Junko Furuta was only 17 years old when this tragedy happened. She endured physical and mental torture daily for over a month until she was finally taken away by these criminals. This tragedy is considered the worst case of juvenile criminal activity in Japanese history even to this day, and every time I remember what happened to her, I personally get teary-eyed. This is the kind of story that makes you question your faith in humanity, and I assure you that I am not using these words carelessly. For some reason, a manga showing these explicit crimes were drawn in 2004 by Waita Uziga. Was it to help people understand the horror this girl went through? Was it to gain a profit from a real story? Was it for a good cause or a bad one? I am not entirely sure, to be honest. All I can say is that sometimes life can be as scary, if not scarier, than fiction. But when you combine the two and realize that atrocities such as this one actually happened and that the world was robbed from an innocent teen who had dreams and aspirations, you start thinking to yourself and question a lot of things. Religion is a difficult topic to discuss, especially in today's era. You could say that all religions may promote segregation and hate towards other people's beliefs. The same way, you can say that there's people in the higher up positions who take advantage of their influence to gain personal power. At the end of the day, it is still a complicated and sensitive topic to talk about, and opinions may vary here and there. What can't be discussed is that the same way religion can separate people, it can also unite them, sometimes in a positive manner, but other times in the worst possible outcome. Today, I come to tell you about cults that have appeared in recent years that brought tragedies beyond our imagination. Some of them you may know about them already, while others might be a bit of a surprise for you. Let's talk about them. Roll the intro. Love Has Won. Love Has Won is a new religious movement which was led by Amy Carlson, referred to within the group as Mother God. Consisting of a group that had between 12 and 20 full-time members, the theology of Love Has Won has been described as fluid, combining New Age spirituality, conspiracy theories, and elements from mainstream Abrahamic religions. The group proclaimed that Carlson was a divine 19 billion-year-old being who had birthed all creation. Carlson claimed that she had been reincarnated 534 times, including as Jesus, Joan of Arc, Marilyn Monroe, and Cleopatra, and would lead 144,000 people into a mystical fifth dimension. The group's theology also included references to the concepts of Atlantis, the Anunnaki, and reptilians. They believed that the world was run by a cabal determined to keep the planet in a low vibration state. What's interesting about this group is that they did daily live streams on YouTube in order to recruit more members, solicit donations, and promote New Age products and vitamin supplements. The group has been described as a cult by ex-members and numerous media outlets. Ex-members accused the group of physical abuse and sleep deprivation, with members allegedly only being allowed to sleep for 4 to 5 hours a night, while also suffering acts of brainwashing and fraud. In May 2020, a member of the group was found wandering the wilderness disoriented, naked, and dehydrated after being described by the group as lacking the right energy and being on the wrong side of the mountain. Despite the group banning alcohol and drugs for members, Carlson was accused of drinking large amounts of alcohol and subsequently behaving abusively. In September 2020, it had been stated that Carlson was in poor health and was paralyzed from the waist down, with Carlson herself stating that she had cancer. In early April 2021, the group was located in an RV park in Mount Shasta in Northern California, but were asked to leave due to overcrowding. Carlson was last seen alive by someone outside the group on April 10, 2021. On April 28th of 2021, Carlson's body was discovered in the mission house near Creston, completely mummified in a sleeping bag wrapped in Christmas lights, the face covered in glitter and the eyes missing, in what authorities stated was a makeshift shrine. It stated that its state of decay suggested that she had been dead for several weeks. She was 45 at the time of her death. 7 members of the group were charged with abuse of a corpse as well as child abuse due to the presence of 2 children in the property. On May 5th, Deputy District Attorney Alex Rains announced plans to upgrade the abuse of corpse charges to the more serious charge of tampering with a deceased human body. The group members were reported to be facing a mix of charges of child abuse, abuse of a corpse, tampering with deceased human remains, and false imprisonment, but the charges were later dropped. In the aftermath of Carson's death, the group splintered, with the most recent Father God, Jason Castillo, forming the separate group Joy Reigns with a small group of followers. The Manson family. In modern era, it's quite difficult to not know about the atrocity of the Manson family, as it has become the most mediatic popular event related to a cult in the 60s and 70s. Founded by Charles Manson in 1967, the Manson family was a commune, gang and cult that consisted of approximately 100 followers who lived an unconventional lifestyle, frequently using psychoactive drugs including amphetamine and hallucinogens such as LSD. Most of the followers of this group consisted of young women from middle-class backgrounds, many of whom were attracted by hippie culture and communal living and then radicalized by Manson's teachings. According to group member Susan Atkins, the members of the family became convinced that Manson was a manifestation of Jesus Christ and believed in his prophecies concerning an imminent apocalyptic race war. According to people who knew him from many years ago, Manson had a dynamic personality. He was able to read a person's emotional weakness and manipulate them. Manson established a base for the family at the Spahn Ranch in Los Angeles County in August 1968. Female family members would often do chores around the ranch and occasionally had sex on Manson's orders. But those are not the reasons why this cult was one of the most disturbing ones in human history. Their living styles and habits do not necessarily define them as disturbing, since these are personal choices of a dogma where you choose to follow it without questioning or not. However, it is their history and their actions that prove to be a legitimate danger for society. In 1969, the Manson family started a shooting involving Bernard Crowe and Tex Watson, another member of the family who became involved in drug dealing. In that same year, the Manson family proceeded to torture and murder Gary Hinman, a music teacher and PhD student at UCLA who became very close to the Manson family. But the most well-known story is the assassination of the actress Sharon Tate, wife of Roman Polanski, in August 8th of 1969. 3 members of the Manson family were sent to Polanski's residence where they proceeded to murder 5 people: Jay Sebring, Abigail Folger, Wojtek Frykowski, Sharon Tate, and her baby. Sharon Tate was 8.5 months pregnant at that time. After that, there were many other murder cases that were confirmed and many others that are alleged but not confirmed to this date. The reason behind the murders led by the family still remains unclear, but according to Charles Watson and Paul Watkins, another member of the Manson's family, Manson and Watson visited an acquaintance who played the Beatles' double album and listened to the song Helter Skelter, and after that became obsessed with the group. Watkins claimed Manson had been saying that racial tensions between blacks and whites were about to erupt, predicted that black Americans would rise up in rebellion, and that the Beatles songs foretold it all in code. Charles Manson died of a heart attack and complications from colon cancer on November 2017 at 83 years old in prison. Today, there's no traces of recent activity of the Manson family, meaning that it was either disbanded or not active ever since. Rajneesh movement. This movement, created by the Indian mystic Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, also known as Osho, never really had a public foundation. Instead, it started when Osho started speaking in public as a lecturer in 1958 in Jabalpur University, more formally known as Rani Durvagati University, and full name being Rani Durvagati Vishwavidyalaya. His teachings consisted of promoting ideals of free love and denounced marriage as a form of social bondage, especially for women. He criticized socialism and Gandhi, but championed capitalism, science, technology, and birth control, warning against overpopulation and criticizing religious teachings that promote poverty and subjection. Due to his controversial takes, University of Jabalpur officials forced Rajneesh to resign in 1966. But by 1972, he had more than 3,800 sannyasins in India, which were his followers. And if that wasn't enough, his ideas attracted followers in the United States, Britain, Germany, Italy, Philippines, Canada, and other European and African countries. In the early 1980s, Rajneesh was having trouble with the Indian government and sent his followers to buy a ranch in Wasco County, Oregon, which they converted into a compound. The community attracted Americans and international followers, some of whom left families and high-paying jobs to meditate at the feet of Rajneesh. Even though the movement presented some tensions with the residents of Wasco, it wasn't until the group collapsed in the 80s due to a bioterror attack in which his followers were instructed of orchestrating a food poisoning scheme against locals with the sole purpose of taking over the local government and nearby town of Antelope. Fortunately, even though more than 700 people were rushed to emergency due to the poisoning, no deaths were registered during this attack. Osho was deported back to India, and the feature was seen as a success into portraying him as a martyr. Rajneesh, aka Osho, died in 1990 and was cremated at the ashram in Pune. However, his movement is still active and has followers in India, the United States, United Kingdom, Germany, Italy, and Netherlands, just to name a few. Aum Shinrikyo. This Japanese new religious movement and doomsday cult was founded by Shoko Asahara in 1987. Its founder, Chizuo Matsumoto, claimed that he sought to restore original Buddhism but employed Christian millennialist rhetoric while also drawing upon elements of early Indian Buddhism and Tibetan Buddhism, as well as Hinduism, taking Shiva as the main image of worship. Asahara's purported mission was to take upon himself the sins of the world, and he claimed he could transfer spiritual power to his followers and ultimately take away their sins and bad deeds. Aum's public relations activities included publishing comics and animated cartoons that attempted to tie its religious ideas to popular anime and manga themes, including space missions, powerful weapons, world conspiracies, and the quest for ultimate truth. Leaving biased opinions aside, from a psychological perspective, we can see the narcissism and prophetic embodiment of these leaders so far, who led them to employ a supreme image of a savior and messiah for its followers. In the case of Asahara, he tried to promote his divine image by convincing his followers that he could perform miracles such as floating and defying the laws of physics and gravity. This was of course false and fabricated. However, it wasn't until the late 80s where the controversies would start with this cult. Some accusations of deception of recruits, holding cult members against their will, forcing members to donate money, and murdering a cult member who tried to leave in February 1989 started to appear, which led to authorities to start prosecuting the leaders of this cult who disappeared from Yokohama after the allegations. Years later, multiple terrorism attacks were performed in 1993 and 1994, with the most devastating one happening in 1995, where Aum members released a binary chemical weapon in a coordinated attack on 5 trains in the Tokyo subway system, killing 13 commuters, seriously injuring 54 and affecting 980 more. Some estimates claim as many as 6,000 people were injured. It is difficult to obtain exact numbers since many victims are reluctant to come forward. While raiding the headquarters of this cult, police discovery found enough evidence to expose this group as a massive threat to Japanese society. The police found explosives, chemical weapons, a Russian Mi-17 military helicopter, laboratories to manufacture drugs such as LSD, methamphetamine, stockpiles of chemicals that could be used for producing enough sarin to kill 4 million people, a safe containing millions of US dollars in cash and gold, and cells, many still containing prisoners. On the 10th of October 1995, Aum Shinrikyo was ordered stripped of its official status as a religious legal entity and was declared bankrupt in early 1996. However, the group continues to operate under the constitutional guarantee of freedom of religion, funded by a successful computer business and donations, and under strict surveillance. On the 6th of July of 2018, Asahara and 6 other Aum Shinrikyo members were executed by hanging. Japan's Justice Minister Yoko Kamikawa stated that the crimes plunged people, not only in Japan but in other countries as well, into deadly fear and shook society to its core. After his execution, there's been one case related to the cult's influence in Japanese society that took place in 2019, where the sympathizer intentionally rammed into pedestrians crowded into narrow street as a terrorist attack in retaliation for an execution. Other than that, there's not been any further events directly connected to this cult. The Matamoros Sacrifices Cult. In 1989, authorities found 12 male bodies on a ranch in Mexico near the US border. They would later find 3 more. 5 drug smugglers were arrested in connection with the murders. When asked about the details about the murders, thinking they would be given information of internal affairs of the cartel's operation, the police was instead told that they thought the human sacrifices would protect their drug smuggling operations. A drug smuggling group who had their own cult and religion, founded by Adolfo de Jesus Constanzo, 26, the leader of the cult, and Sara Aldrete, a student at Texas Southmost College, known as the Witch. The reason this cult is called The Matamoros sacrifices cult is because this group was located in the city of Matamoros in Tamaulipas, Mexico. These cult's activities started to take place in the early 80s, and the practices consisted of raiding graveyards to get human bones to put in a cauldron called nyanga in their local cultural slang, to protect them during their businesses. But on later years, they would offer human sacrifices instead for a much tighter and stronger protection with the help of satanic imagery as well. This group's activity stopped the day a Texan student, Mark Kilroy, disappeared while on spring break. He was suspected to have been abducted by this cult, and with the Texas politicians' pressure on top, Mexican police was forced to dig in deeper and capture Adolfo. When the ranch of the Central Operations was raided, they discovered the following: Adolfo's cauldron full with a dead black cat and a human brain, and 15 mutilated corpses were dug up at the ranch. One of them was Kilroy's body. Adolfo fled to Mexico City with 4 of his followers. While here, a different unrelated issue took place in the building they were staying, and thus the police came. Thinking they were coming after him, they opened fire with a machine gun, and reinforcements were brought to the building. Refusing to be brought to justice, he asked his follower, Álvaro de León, to shoot him in the head to avoid capture. By the time the police got in, Adolfo and Quintana, his right hand, were already dead. 14 cult members, including Sara Aldrete, the witch, were charged with a range of crimes, including drug running, murder, and obstructing the justice system, just to name a few and avoid the obvious ones. Aldrete is serving a prison sentence of 60 years, and if she were to be released in the future, she would be prosecuted for the murder of Mark Kilroy. If there's any silver lining in this story, is that there's no activity related to this cult recorded in recent years. The People's Temple. Full name: People's Temple of the Disciples of Christ, originally called People's Temple Full Gospel Church, and commonly shortened to People's Temple. Founded in 1954, this American new religious organization was created by James Warren Jones, more commonly known as Jim Jones. The People's Temple spread a message that combined elements of Christianity with communist and socialist ideology, with an emphasis on racial equality. It is important to mention the political view of this group because it had a further effect on its influence as years went by, since the temple forged ties with many left-wing political figures and claimed to have over 20,000 members, even though it is believed that the real number was more likely between 3,000 and 5,000 members. It is also important because by the time his communist and socialist ideas were being spread throughout his followers, Jim Jones feared the prosecution during the Red Scare, also known as McCarthyism during the 40s and 50s. Despite this, many of the conservative minds of that era still followed his teachings and became followers as well. Like the other leaders in this list, Jim Jones was promoting his cult as a salvation dogma whose ideals revolted around the political environment while being disguised as a religion. Jones's commonly known apostolic socialism cult was accused in the press of financial fraud, physical mistreatment of members, and abuse of children in its care. To be precise, the cult will often ask members of their cult to surrender their children for physical and mental preparation for a community life, for which many of the followers often agreed to do. Other methods of structurization would include humiliation, physical torture, ostracism, and, a lot of the times, even murder. Infidels would not be welcome, and the followers would support these measures. Due to the accusations, media started following and questioning Jones's movement for accusations of violating human rights, for which they rented and fled to Jonestown, Guyana. On November 17, 1978, Representative Leo Ryan, who was investigating claims of abuse within the temple, visited Jonestown. During his visit, a number of temple members expressed a desire to live with him, and on November 18th, some accompanied Ryan to the local airstrip at Port Kaituma. There, they were intercepted by temple security guards who opened fire on the group, killing Ryan, 3 journalists, and one of the defectors, as well as injuring 9 others, including Ryan's aide, Jakey Speyer. A few seconds of gunfire from the incident were captured on video by NBC cameraman Bob Brown, one of the journalists killed in the attack. You would think that after this tragedy, it could not escalate any further, right? Well, remember the case of Alfonso, who wished to be taken out to avoid capture? What Jim Jones did was similar, but only 1,000 times worse. On that same night, Jones ordered his congregation to force his followers to consume cyanide for a massive takeout. I can't say the word because YouTube would censor and delete this video otherwise. A lot of members tried to resist to commit this revolutionary mass self-deletion and were injected with fatal doses of cyanide. Those who were able to escape did it by fleeing through the jungle, but the rest of them collapsed. A massive total of 918 people died that day, including 276 children. While you may be unsettled by me telling you this, there is an outstanding and yet horrifying discovery as well. I'll give full credit of this to the channel High Def in case you want to hear it completely, but the death tape of 1978 can be heard in his YouTube channel. In here, you can hear the followers resisting, standing up, yelling, discontent, and even criticizing the infidels for not following Jim's orders. But what's worse, you can hear the children scream as the event happened. I will proceed to share with you just a small fragment of what you can expect right now.
Die with respect, die with a degree of dignity. Lay down your life with dignity. Don't lay down with tears and agony. There's nothing to death. It's like Max said, it's just stepping over into another plane. Don't be this way. Stop this hysterics. This is not the way for people who are socialist, communists to die. No way for us to die. We must die with some dignity. Soon we'll have no choice. Now we have some choice. You think they're going to allow this to be done and allow us to get by with this?
Must be insane.
But children, it's just something to put you to rest. Oh, God. Mother, 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 please. Mother, please, 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 don't do this, don't do this. Lay down your life with your child, but don't do this. Free at last. Peace. Keep your emotions down, keep your emotions down. Children, it will not hurt if you'll be quiet, if you'll be quiet.
In the world of music, there have been multiple brutal and horrifying stories that would give any rational human the shivers. Some are tragic, some are simply insane, and then we have the ones that defy any common sense for how insane they are. Today, I'm not going to make a list, but instead to tell you about a tragic story that became even more horrifying as time went on. Roll the intro. Like I mentioned before, there are some bizarre stories in the world of music. You have the example of Gigi Allen, a punk rock musician known for his peculiar, extreme performances. From going absolutely naked into the mosh pit with the crowd, vomiting, defecating live, and even cutting himself while performing. You also got myths like the story of Silencer, a black metal group whose stories are still debatable to this day. Allegedly, the singer was so mentally unstable that voices in the industry tell the tales of how he used to cut himself to achieve better screaming in his songs. It is also stated that he cut some pig paws and stitched them in his stumps. It's also mentioned that due to a mental breakdown, he went running into the street with an axe and almost killed a little 6-year-old girl with it before being institutionalized. But, like I said before, none of that was 100% confirmed, and it's still discussed to this day. With that said, we've got a confirmed case of a showman willing to do anything to make his concerts a unique experience, and a myth regarding a black metal singer who confused passion with insanity. What could be any more brutal than this? Well, this story is not necessarily the main label of this band, but it is something really hard to forget, as nothing like this has ever been seen before, and hopefully we'll never get to see again. Let me introduce you to this successful Swedish black metal band, Mayhem. Black metal may not be your cup of tea when it comes to music, but if there's something we can't deny is the dedication these musicians have for their craft. A very chaotic and fast style made only for certain audiences that requires a lot of skill, sacrifice, and appeal. And it's fair to say that all the members from the band Mayhem have everything they need for that, but there is one member who used to take it a bit far. Meet Dead. Real name, and forgive me for butchering his name, Per Ingve Olin, commonly known as Pelje, was the main singer of the band from 1988 to 1991. Indeed, he passed away, but that's not the reason his nickname was Dead. The reason for that is because of his troubled personality and obsession with death itself. You see, it is discussed to this day if Dead was the first musician to ever wear corpse paint, makeup crafted for black metal musicians to provide a distinguished look. In the case of Dead, he wore this makeup because he tried his best to look as close as possible to a corpse. But that's not everything. You could say that he was very committed to his craft, or that he was mentally insane, both arguments being perfectly valid. Dead didn't think the looks of a dead corpse were enough. he would also bury his stage clothes and dig them up again to wear the night of a concert. Mayhem drummer Hellhammer even stated once he even asked us to bury him in the ground. He wanted his skin to become pale. If that wasn't enough, Dead would also carry around a bag with him all the time and sniff it before a concert. What was inside this bag? Nothing more than a dead crow he found on the road. He loved the smell of rotten flesh and bones and needed some inspiration to perform live. And no, this was not the only dead animal he kept with him. He also kept dead birds under his bed. Dead was in fact so committed to his art that at a concert where there were around 300 people listening to their songs, he started to throw bloody pig heads at the crowd. The reason? Because he wanted to get rid of the posers. That concert ended up with just 50 people, and he enjoyed every second of it. His statement: if someone doesn't like blood and rotten flesh thrown in their face, they can f*** off. And that's exactly what they do. After telling you all of this, you would expect me to tell you that he was a sociopath with his co-workers, family and friends, being so openly obsessed with death and extroverted during his concerts, right? Well, not really. If anything, Dead was the total opposite. According to the people who knew him the most, he was introverted, awkward, melancholic, dark, and depressed. Euronymous, the band's founder, stated once, "I honestly think Dead is mentally insane. Which other way can you describe a guy who does not eat in order to get starving wounds, or who has a t-shirt with funeral announcements on it?" And the truth is that, yes, he was mentally sick. From tales of constantly telling dark jokes about taking his own life more than once, to gutting himself in front of his friends, forcing them to hold him to the ground, and sometimes even locking himself in his bedroom for days with no real contact with anyone. And unfortunately, after all these indications of Dead's mental health rapidly declining, on April 8 of 1991, Dead finally ended his life in the most horrifying way. First, he cut his wrists, then proceeded to slice his own throat, and if that wasn't enough, he picked up the shotgun and finished his existence immediately. Dead was only 22 years old when he passed away, and he left a brief goodbye note which started with the line, "Excuse the blood," showing that even in the worst possible moments, he still had the darkest bit of humor still intact. But the story isn't over, as this seems more like a depressing story than a horrifying one. This is where the true, crude human nature kicks in. Euronymous, the band's founder I mentioned earlier, had a beef with Dead, and these two did not get along. From constantly fighting each other, threatening to stab each other, and escalating discussions to points of no return, Euronymous is suspected to be the one who pushed Dead to commit such acts. This is backed up by other members' stories in which Dead would make a self-deletion joke only for Euronymous to say, "Do it," or "That would be a great idea, actually." And if fate wasn't cruel enough, the one who found Dead's body was Euronymous himself. By the time he found the body, the most humane and reasonable thing to do would be to call the police, the ambulance, the firefighters, anyone who would assist you with that. But not Euronymous. He had a different idea in mind. He left the house and abandoned Dead's body. He went to a nearby shop to purchase a disposable camera, went back into the house and took a picture of Dad's body rotting, even rearranging items on the room to make the picture more artistic. Only then he would call the emergency services. There is a silver lining to this mess, and that is that the other band members did not like what Euronymous did a single bit. In fact, they were furious, disgusted, and ashamed to have this rotten human being as a band member. Negrobacha, another band member, not only left the band, but also ended his friendship with Euronymous forever. But wait, because the story isn't over yet. It was rumored that the band members later proceeded to eat a stew with Dad's brain and made necklaces with bits of his skull. The band had to step forward and let everyone know that this story is false. But just the first part. According to them, the necklace part is true, and they give necklaces like those to musicians they deem worthy. Now, all of this may be pure marketing and disrespect towards another band member, but there is one thing that is true with evidence to back it up. Remember when I told you that Euronymous took a picture of Dad's corpse? Well, he initially promised to delete the photo, but later he changed his mind and went to develop it at a record shop. After he got it, this same photo was sent to the owner of War Master Records, and the reason? It was used as a cover art for a bootleg live album called The Dawn of the Black Hearts. You did not mishear anything. A picture of a real young man with his wrists open, a sliced throat, a gunshot in his head, and brains all over the bed was commercially used to sell CDs. This would be the last time they would use Dad's passing to commercialize their work, as there was a previous one for their CD, Live in Lipstick, which contained a small fraction of Dad's self-deletion note. I am not a human being. This is just a dream, and soon I will wake. It's cliché to say at this point that you should play a game at 2 a.m. in the morning simply because it would be scarier or thrilling. Me, on the other hand, I enjoy this time of the night because of the silence and lack of distractions that allow me to immerse myself in a game. Not necessarily horror games, I must say, but I have to agree that this genre makes the best candidate for this specific time, as you feel the dread, desperation, and immersion it can provide. I bring 7 games today. Not all of them are horror themed necessarily, but will be worthy of trying at least once to get a surprise or two for your enjoyment. Roll the intro. This War of Mine. The first entry of this list could be considered, depending on some people's perspective, realistic horror. This War of Mine is, as the title says, a war game, but from the perspective of citizens rather than the soldiers, and instead of simply being a survival horror game, you have to make the most out of your choices, even if this could bring terrible consequences. The results are realistic and shows you not only the horrors of war and how these affect you, but others as well. You need to build your base and make sure it's safe to survive the ongoing conflict. That means you have to gather supplies, materials, and face enemies in the most extreme situations to see another day. You can start every campaign with one or more characters, and this conclude with day cycles. At night, you can choose to rest or explore. Both of them can bring great results or terrible consequences for you. You may end up exploring a place that's full of supplies that will help you and the people with you, but the drawback is that it's a house with an elderly couple who can barely defend themselves. The game doesn't force you to steal from them. It's your choice to do it or not. And if you do and come back to the house, you may find the couple hugging in their bed, not moving, showing you how they spent their last moments together because you chose to take everything from them. And this decision, for example, isn't just rewarding, as it could take a mental toll on your character. You'll need to take care of their physical and mental health. Make sure you survive the winter, cheer other members up so they don't consider self-deletion, and if you choose to explore, be cautious and well equipped, because this game has permadeath mechanics. If one of your characters dies, they are dead for good, and you have to manage it on your own, both physically and mentally speaking. Oh, and have I mentioned that you can have campaigns taking care of children as well? Well, you do. This will also have a moral impact on your decisions as well. Are you willing to do what it takes to make sure that child survives? Even if it means facing other innocent people or stealing from a hospital. There is no script in this adventure. It's your choice and yours alone. Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. I've talked about this game a lot, but there's a good reason for that. This underappreciated gem puts you in the shoes of Senua, set in a dark fantasy world inspired by Norse mythology and Celtic culture. She suffers from psychosis and hears voices all the time, but she does not know that this is a sickness, but a curse instead. Being ostracized and abused her entire life and labeled as a witch, Senua knew nothing but suffering her entire life, and she's on a quest to rescue the soul of her beloved from the grasps of the Viking goddess of death, Hela. To do that, Senua has to face the path of Helheim and conquer the darkness that will infect Senua more and more as time passes by. Since this is set in the Viking and Celtic culture, the demons she sees resemble the myths she heard of, and the creatures she has to face resemble demons, giants, or gods. What's interesting of this game is that the voices she hears are not just part of the plot, but a mechanic as well. This will tell you when enemies are nearby, where the solution of a puzzle might be, or in the worst possible scenario, even fool you. As you progress through the game, you will encounter puzzles that are connected to Senua's story and how she got here to begin with, while being haunted by ghosts of her past traumas, only to be motivated to move forward by the memory of her beloved. Also, there's an interesting mechanic on this game. Every time Senua dies, darkness takes a part of her body. If the darkness takes over her head, the journey is over and your game progress gets permanently deleted. Lastly, I'd like to say that there's a section at the end of the game which is, in my opinion, the most frightening environment of any game ever created, in which you can barely see anything around you, and you can only use sound as your tool for navigation. But don't let that fool you, because some of these sounds could be deceiving as well, and you may end up discovering something you did not want to see. Darkwood. I discovered this game very recently, to be honest, but it only took 30 minutes of gameplay in my stream to be fully invested in it. This semi-open world puts you in the shoes of a stranger whose story is very vague, and you need to survive in this world where the forest has taken over. Roads, cottages, and even animals and humans. Every once in a while, you'll encounter other survivors whose morality might be as vague as your own story. Apart from presenting you with a survival horror experience, the game also has a day and night system in which you need to traverse the land to discover a way out. I can't tell you for certain if going out at night could be a better or worse option. What I can say though is this: let's assume it's safer to go out at night. Would you do it? A lot of the times, you'll barely see the creatures ahead of you, and you will need to trade with other characters as you progress throughout the story. They may be friendly and compassionate with you, but can you know for certain? Especially when they don't even resemble anything you have ever seen before. But that's not everything. You'll also have to take difficult decisions in this game too. Will you kill or spare the person or animal in front of you? What are the benefits or consequences of doing so? What happens if you don't? Apart from having an excellent atmosphere, this game plays with your head more than what you play with the overall world. If you're ready to embark into this adventure, make sure you have the right mindset and leave behind your normal sense of morality. Trust me, it will be better for you in the long term. Hey, very unorthodox from my end to do this, but I realized while editing this video that if I didn't do this disclaimer, it would be very cruel for my part. I know that it may sound hypocritical after mentioning the other games before with very dark topics, but I realized that the next games could not just scare you, but also hurt your sensitivity, as they have content that would truly harm people with heart conditions, epilepsies, or could easily be disturbed by plus 18 content. They include sexual abuse, truly horrifying jump scares, and art direction that would do a lot of harm if not handled properly. I know this is the month of terror, and trust me when I tell you that I'm not exaggerating. But if I did not take into consideration your well-being, I would not be entertaining. I would be a dick. If you still want to know more about these games, continue watching the video, and again, thank you for your support. Let's continue with the rest of the entries. Saturnalia. The advantage of indie studios developing games is that they can get away with ideas that would not be approved by greedy producers. That's why I applaud the work of this Italian studio when they released Saturnalia, a survival horror game where you don't play as just one character but many. This game features scenes of implied physical violence, domestic abuse, and limited gory imagery, screams, human and animal corpses, blood trails, you name it. Throughout the game, character dialogue and clues make references to self-deletion, substance abuse, sexual violence, racism, homophobia, sexism, and abortion that some people may find distressing or disturbing. If that wasn't enough, the first truly horrifying moment of this game happens right after the first night, where the first character, Anita, goes to the church to find her beloved and baby's father. Upon entering, you see that the church is empty, and as the camera changes, you are suddenly visited by a shadowy figure emerging from the fog that chases you very slowly. All you can do is run and meet up with your friend at the mines. Right after that, the second character, Paul, who is a photojournalist, also has a story to discover in this town, and the clues lead him to the mines. Here, you have to be very cautious as the mines are dark and it's not easy to navigate them, while also avoiding that terrifying presence that could be chasing you or not. The game also features a puzzle mechanic where you can tie the stories together and see how they are connected to the ritual that takes place in the city. But to uncover the story, you need to traverse the different locations of this game. Are you willing to take up the challenge? Fear and Hunger. If there's one type of video game I was not expecting horror to be applied flawlessly, was RPG, and Fear and Hunger delivers with no disappointment. In this survival horror and fantasy game, you traverse the cave that resides the god of the depths, an entity whose body is the cave. This means that every time you start your adventure, the layout of this game changes, conditioning you to have a new experience each time. But that's not all. Contrary to other RPGs, you don't have a leveling system here. You don't get experience from killing the enemies, just the chance to not face them again in the future, and the enemies will do serious harm to you. Inspired by Lovecraftian horror, you need to make difficult choices as you play. When facing an enemy, rather than attacking the enemy as a whole, you have to choose which part of the enemy to attack. It could be the head, the arms, the torso, and in some cases, genitalia. I know that for a lot of people this might be weird, but keep in mind that we're talking about erotophobia here, a fear to genitals and sex. And since most of these creatures are primal and horrifying, they will not hesitate to abuse you. And since we're talking about phobias, your character can have a phobia like the one I mentioned before. This means that if they encounter anything related to their phobia, the game becomes more difficult and will affect the party. Enemies can not just kill you, but poison you, break your bones, and even dismember you. This will affect the gameplay. If you lose a leg, you'll walk slower than usual. Lose both legs, you have to drag your body throughout the dungeon. Lose an arm and you can no longer hold a shield. Lose both arms and, well, good luck. And no, this can't be reversed. I think that the part where this game succeeds the most is the sound design as well. Visuals may be a take or leave, but you can also get messages of things happening around you. Sometimes your character might be hungry, or their mind state could be so low they might consider self-deletion and choose not to continue to be in your party. But sometimes the game may even show messages of a terrifying presence entering the room or something getting closer. The combination of eerie silence, ominous sounds, and even very loud noises when minutes ago everything was dead silent will put you on your toes more times than you can count. Walk. This game is really short and it's hard to recommend it as a full experience. However, the art direction this took was done so incredibly well that I couldn't simply not include it in this list. Inspired by the polygon aesthetic of PS1 games, Walk puts you in the shoes of a schoolgirl going back home while being chased by a terrifying presence. Not sure if it's a ghost, a monster, or ethereal entity. But every time this thing is close, Messages appear in your screen and you have to run and hide from it. Remember, you are just a little girl escaping from this thing. No power, no weapons, no speed, nothing. You are defenseless and you can only hope to reach to your destination. But make no mistake here. Just because you hide, it doesn't mean you're safe. The creature can still find you, so all you can do is follow the instructions that appear on the screen and hope you made the right decision. Was it a good idea to hide, or should I run instead? All I can say is that you cannot hesitate, because rather than being incomplete, the game uses technical limitations as a mechanic, and you need to think fast if you want to succeed. Akamanto. This game has very unsettling jump scares. You have been warned. Based on the Japanese myth of Akamanto, also known as Aoi Manto, in popular folklore, who happens to be a masked spirit who wears a red cloak and who appears to people using toilets in public or school bathrooms, and released by Chile's Art in 2019. This game follows the story of a young student who is trapped in a school by bullies and is forced to navigate their way through the halls of the school, collect items, solve puzzles, and escape the creature. This game is also inspired by polygonal PS1 graphics, and the environments and sound design are an experience to behold. You can't kill the ghost, you can't exit the level, and even if you pause, the game continues. This is what I consider the perfect combination of simple plot with outstanding execution. The only way to improve the experience such as this one is by releasing this game in VR, as it would bring the immersion to a whole new level. What else can I say? The game is very simple in its plot and only made for the brave to be played. You want to know why? Well, I'm warning you in advance now. You are going to be jump scared. But still, let me leave some gameplay for you to enjoy. Bear with me for a second. I know that a lot of horror movies are disappointing. Nowadays, the premises are either too basic, recycled, and not really entertaining. And what's worse, the only scary parts are the jump scares. And that makes me a bit sad, because horror should not just be a temporary situation, but a concept that should live rent-free in your head. And for this video, I could be talking about disturbing movies such as Salo, Fuba, or a Serbian film. Instead, I decided to tone this video down a bit and present you with simply good horror films, which were not meant to give you a trauma. After all, Halloween and the Month of Terror would not be complete if I didn't present you with interesting horror concepts only made to entertain and make you remember it for how well crafted it was. Enough said. Here's 5 good horror movies I recommend you to watch. Roll the intro. the others. I remember being a little kid when I watched this movie and how not many people talked about it. Released in 2001 and starring Nicole Kidman, the plot revolves around a woman in 1945 who lives in a house with her two children who happen to have a very specific skin condition in which they are very sensitive to light. Because of this, she needs to keep the house covered in curtains and avoid any amount of light from entering the house. One day, a housekeeper, Mrs. Bertha Mills, gardener Edmund Tuttle, and a mute girl named Lydia arrive, all seeking employment. Nicole's character, Grace, hires them and is pleased to learn the three worked in the same house years prior. Grace's daughter, Anne, claims to be regularly visited by a young boy named Victor, his parents, and an elderly blind woman. Grace believes this to be a fantasy, but after she begins hearing footsteps and disembodied voices herself, she orders the house to be searched, believing there could be intruders. In a storage room, she finds a 19th century photo album containing photographs of the corpses. Mrs. Mills recounts that many left in 1891 due to an outbreak of tuberculosis. Grace begins to fear that there are supernatural entities in the home, but struggles to reconcile such things with her rigid Catholic faith. The plot revolves in Grace figuring out this mystery for the sake and protection of her children. But the more things she discovers, the more questions start to appear as the plot moves forward. Instead of relying on cheap jump scares and screams, the entire environment of this movie already conditions you into believing that something isn't right and there's more than what meets the eye. The dark environments are justified for the sake of the plot, and as you connect the dots for the final twist, you'll finish the movie feeling empty and yet amazed by the incredible photography, acting, and writing of this movie. I would rather not spoil the twist of this movie. Trust me, it's a once-in-a-lifetime chance for you to be amazed. Pontypool. Zombies have come in many shapes and sizes. Some were good, others were great, and others were a bit repetitive or boring. In this Canadian production, we've got a new twist on the zombies, and for me to sell you this movie, I have to give you very minor spoilers. But don't worry, even though there are many twists in the story, the main one is still a huge sign of clever writing. Released in 2008, the plot revolves around a man, Grant Mazzy, talking on his phone when he is approached by a woman who keeps saying the word blood constantly without making any sense. As he rolls his window down, the woman disappears in the darkness without saying a word. When he arrives at his workplace, he receives the news of people rioting and becoming increasingly violent, aggressive, and impossible to reason with. It's important to mention that Grant and his co-workers are working from a radio station, so the news they are receiving are vague and difficult to decipher. People call letting the producer know that people are becoming violent out of nowhere, as if something sprouted from inside of them, but not enough information is received to understand the situation. When they receive the guests for a musical on their show, who do a very questionable musical and politically incorrect act for the show that they are promoting, one of the members starts mumbling words that make no sense and gets stuck in a loop, just like the first woman who screamed blood at the beginning of the movie. After that, they received an encrypted transmission from BBC, which is an instruction to remain indoors, not to use terms of endearment, baby talk, rhetorical discourse, or the English language, and not to translate the message. Pontypool is declared to be under quarantine. This movie does not have the typical zombies we know for being infected by a virus, a mushroom, rabies, or a spell, but rather mental regression forcing them into a primal state triggered by specific words. And these words attract them to a specific location where the words were located. And the worst part? By the time they receive the instructions, it's too late for the protagonists of the story. The so-called zombies are marching to the main source of triggering words for most of its infected, the radio station. So far, you can see that this is full of twists here and there, but the way the movie continues is very well written. Because, at least in my opinion, it could only be written and directed in Canada. I won't spoil it for you either, because it's a must-watch as well. Wreck. Many of you already know about this movie, probably by the name Quarantine, but the original Spanish version called Rec is one that shook a lot of viewers in the mid-2000s. Rather than giving you a full explanation of the plot, I'll just give you the basic description. Reporter Ángela Vidal and her cameraman Pablo are covering the night shift in one of Barcelona's local fire stations for the television series While You're Sleeping. The firehouse receives a call about an old woman, Mrs. Izquierdo, who is trapped in her apartment. Ángela and Pablo accompany two of the firefighters, Alex and Manu, to the apartment building on Rambla de Catalunya. The old woman becomes aggressive and attacks one of the police officers, biting his neck. The crew finds that the police and military have sealed off the building and trapped them inside. With that said, you can already tell that this is another zombie type of movie, but in the style of 28 Days Later, combined with found footage format, which in my opinion has been executed perfectly. Not only is the camera movement erratic and unsettling, but the sound design as well. From the moments of very thrilling silence to the unsettling jump scares that are justified here compared to cheap horror made in other movies. If you want a biased opinion from this entertainer, allow me to say that I believe this to be the most realistic zombie movie next to 28 Days Later. Oh, and I forgot to mention, if you end up enjoying this movie, you'll feel lucky to know that it also has a sequel, which acts like a prequel to the events of the first movie. Annihilation. We are moving from the thrilling jump scares to the psychological horror. Hollywood has made some mediocre horror movies in the last years, but you got to give them credit when they deserve it. Starring Natalie Portman and Oscar Isaac, Annihilation is one of the best representations for Lovecraftian horror. Released in 2018, the story revolves about cellular biology professor and former US Army soldier Lena, who is under interrogation after experiencing the events that took place inside the Shimmer, a strange quarantine zone where she was the only one to return. Prior to this, Lena's husband Kane and his squad entered this quarantine zone, who was affected from a meteor that landed in a lighthouse in the St. Mark National Wildlife Refuge in Florida, and it is gradually expanding and increasing its boundaries. When Kane returns after 1 year of being missing, his psyche has decreased immensely and his health gets worse, spitting blood and his internal organs failing to an abrupt pace. Lena decides to embark to the Shimmer with a squad of female scientists and soldiers to investigate, since every squad prior to them were all male and still suffered from horrible health conditions and deformities. It's not radiation, temperature, or gravity, something weirder happening inside the area. Due to the biological factors taking place in this quarantine zone, maybe a group of people with different biological structure would be luckier in this expedition, only to be proven wrong. When the new squad enters the shimmer, they wake up 3 days later with no memory of what they've done prior to that. Compasses don't work, radio signals get distorted, and if that wasn't enough, the scientific knowledge of every member allows them to notice that flora and fauna of that place is unusual. Multitude of plant species are born from the same branch. Animals have distinctive features not possible in the real world, and they end up discovering the records of Kane's squad expedition. As the group starts to get deeper into the shimmer, more strange events start to happen. All biological entities in that place mutated to extents that defy human reasoning and logic, like a tumor. Plants taking human shapes, minerals growing in places where they shouldn't, and even the squad starts experimenting changes in their bodies. Having said that, it is a movie where nothing can be predicted, as the philosophical, scientific, and logical aspects can be summarized as randomized or left at the fate of pure chaos. Maybe the being that infects everything in their surroundings is not evil, but simply exists and adapts. But hey, that's for you to find out. Tumbad. There are a lot of hidden gems in Bollywood's cinema that not many people talk about, which is a shame because they deserve more recognition. Of course, you've got the examples of Slumdog Millionaire, Life of Pi, and RRR. But what about horror? Well, I've got for you a movie that took 6 years to be made, and the result ended up being so impressive that could easily be expanded into its own universe. Released in 2018 and directed by Rai Anil Barve, Tumbad is not just a horror film, but a fantasy one as well. Imagine a Lovecraftian horror universe set in India, where the goddess of prosperity gives birth to 160 million gods. Hastar, her first and most beloved offspring, was greedy for all her gold and food. This god manages to steal the gold, but wants the wheat she produces too. Being discovered by the other gods, they aim to kill him, but the goddess protects him and keeps him eternally in her womb. The only condition was that nobody could ever worship him, and he would remain in slumber eternally until the people of Tumbad started to worship him, forcing his awakening. Thousands of years later, Tumbad's story takes place in 3 different chapters: 1918, 1930, and 1947. In the first year, the main character of the story, Vinayak Rao, has the task of feeding his grandmother to make her fall asleep. Her grandmother, however, is not like any typical old lady, but rather a deformed one who is immortal but keeps aging nonetheless. The second and third chapter shows the story of Sohum Shah's character, Vinayak Rao, being incredibly prosperous for bringing golden coins to sustain his family. The thing is, nobody knows where these coins come from. In the third chapter, however, we see how Vinayak tells his son how he got the coins to begin with, and shows him the entrance of the god Hesta, who lies inside of a flesh cave that resembles a womb. In here, Vinayak has been following the dormant god to steal his coins and sustain his family for many years, and now it's his son's turn to do the same. I've been very vague with the story on purpose, as the plot of this movie deserves to be explored and enjoyed. From cinematography, camera work, makeup, special effects, and overall idea. This movie was originally drafted in 1997, and there were multiple studios who rejected the idea until it was finally approved in 2012, only to be released in 2018. 6 years in the making, costing $630,000, and so much passion put into it actually gave amazing results, as the movie ended up earning $1.7 million at the box office. Normally, I like to end these videos for the month of terror with a chilling and eerie feeling. But this time, I prefer to share with you these recommendations and ask you to let me know what you thought of them. This has been Juano, and thank you for watching. Hello everyone, I hope you're doing great today. To finish the month of terror, I've been thinking about a lot of ideas. Maybe create a short horror movie for you, but I lack the budget. I thought of streaming the game that scared me the most in my life, but I thought it was boring. I even thought of telling you about a horrifying event that would send shivers down your spine, but that would have been repetitive. I wanted to bring a closure to the month of terror in a memorable way, something that would be more suitable for these circumstances. And so, while being lost in my train of thought, I remembered a game that I played when I was a wee lad. You may have heard about it before, but in case you haven't, you don't need to worry. I'll guide you through the whole process. The game itself is called Three Kings, and you can do it yourself if you feel confident enough. You need a very specific preparation to do it though, but I'll help you out. You will need the following: 3 chairs. These can be couches, kitchen chairs, whatever is more comfortable for you. 2 mirrors. These can be big or small, but they have to be able to stand on their own. A piece of paper and a pen. Make sure that you can rip the piece of paper in small pieces, but also make sure you can write on them. Get a matchbox with only 3 matches. No more, no less. 1 watch. Make sure you can set up an alarm on it. It can't be a smartwatch though. A digital one will do. That's it. You've got all the materials in the house. Now let's get to the instructions, shall we? First and foremost, you'll act like a king, and you're having a party. An exclusive one. Since it's so exclusive, it can only be done after midnight. If you attempt to do it earlier, no guest will ever arrive. Before midnight, you need to count the number of rooms in your house. Include bathroom, kitchen, even closet. Make sure that every single place with a door is included, except the place where you left the chairs and the mirror. We'll get to that in a second. With that said, if there's a total of 6 rooms in your house and you're playing the game in the living room, tear the paper into 5 different pieces. In each of these pieces, you need to write the following: I, the king, hereby invite you to my party. It will last from blank AM to blank AM. Important. Do not write down more than 5 minutes for your own sake. Not even the greatest of kings was able to hold such a long party. Having said that, keep the papers to yourself for now. Go to the party room and put the mirrors in 2 chairs. These two need to be facing each other, but you should place them in front of you, making sure you don't see their reflections. If you manage to do that last part, angle the mirrors better or move the chairs a bit further away. Wait until your time of the party is getting close. Let's assume you wanted to have your party ready at 2 a.m. just because you felt like it, and the party will end at 2:05. Write that down in the paper, and once the time is getting closer, slide those papers under every door of your house. Bathroom, closet, bedroom, all of them. Trust me, the last thing you want to do is for any of them to feel left out. The time is getting closer, so now you need to disconnect every single electronic in the house. This includes fridge, microwave, TV, everything. Also, turn off the lights. This is important as the lights will only worsen their mood. Seems like everything is ready, but you need to check something first. Take a final look at the mirrors. If these are broken, abort the party and get out of there. If your chair was moved from its original place, abort the party. And very important, if you left a single device connected in your house, abort the party now. If all is well, you may proceed to sit on your throne. The queen and the fool are waiting for you for the initiation. Don't say a word, don't make a noise, and be respectful. Act like a king would do. But you might find it weird because I asked you to act like a king, but I never said that you were the king. Those in front of you may act like queen and fool, but to their eyes, you could be a queen or a fool. In their eyes, they are the king. So better choose your words carefully. But before that, remember the matchbox with the 3 matches I told you about? Well, we need to make sure that our guests have a right for the discussion. So, open the matchbox and try to light every single match. But here's the thing. You only get 1 attempt with every match and no more than that. Disobey the rules and, well, let's just say that those in front of you will not take it lightly. 1 scratching attempt with every match. If the first one fails, throw it on the floor. Same with the second one and the third one. At this point, there is no turning back, and you can only stay silent and follow the rules. If the match doesn't light up, I'm sorry to say that nobody came to your party. You're free to stand up, turn on the lights, and try again next year. However, if the match does light up, then the party has started. Never look at your surroundings. Do not even look at the fire coming out of your match, and don't make loud noises. Act like a king. Now that the party has started, 2 more matches will light in front of you, and you may start the conversation. Feel free to ask whatever you want, but always be respectful. Not just because of manners, but because, well, let's just say that they do not like being disrespected. Whatever you do, do not pay attention to the voices behind you. Don't look back and don't respond to them. They are guests, but you are the host. As a king, you have to take control of the situation. Whenever you ask a question, you'll get answers, sometimes in the form of another question directed to you. Sometimes you will be asked a question, and for your own sake, you'll have to be precise in your answer. But there is something to keep in mind. Remember when I told you to make sure the party lasts no more than 5 minutes? Well, the match will not last more than that, and it will be the only ally standing by your side at that moment. But every ally has to go eventually, and if you decided to make the party last longer, let's just say you will not feel alone, but not in the good way. Finally, respect the rules. If the party ends at 2:05, you only get up at 2:05. The match will tell you when it's time. Oh, and whatever you do, do not turn on the lights while the party is still going. Just because you can't see them in the dark, it doesn't mean they are not there. Are you sure you want to know who you invited? Do you really want to see them? I guess it's my turn. Let the party begin.